We are here because we are dedicated to helping the entire CrossFit community. Determined to elevate coaches, box owners, athletes, and everything in between, we believe that this mission will begin right here, right now. While this time and this goal begins with you, our hope is that you take this fire ignited within you and weave it into your own life with the same unrelenting passion to give those you have the privilege of coming in contact with the best hour of their day.
Welcome to the show, Jenna Muri. Did I say that right?
You got it.
Jenna Muri-Rosenthal. So, CrossFit Level 2 trainer, adaptive and inclusive trainer. Did you take the ATA course with
Yes.
Alex Zirkenbach?
I did, yeah.
Alec is a good friend of mine.
He's the
So
best.
really cool. That course is great. Highly recommend it.
As I recommend it to everyone.
Yeah, back in the day it was like, okay, you should take the gymnastics course because it's body awareness. Cool. Then it became you should take the kids course because if you can coach kids, you can coach adults. And I think really nowadays it's getting to the point where you need to have some sort of adaptive seminar, course, curriculum, on your resume, because if we're truly going to move in the direction of CrossFit is for anyone, then you have to be prepared for anyone.
Yeah. And I think even beyond that, like adaptive training better prepares coaches to keep athletes in the gym when they're injured, because it kind of opens your eyes to the variety of ways that we can modify things, from having athletes sit to single arm, all of that stuff. So even your everyday athlete can benefit from that like level of knowledge.
Yeah. And, full disclosure, while I don't believe CrossFit is dangerous, everyone's going to get hurt at some point in their CrossFit career, not necessarily from CrossFit, whether it's, running and twisting their ankles or a car accident or whatever it is. You need to be prepared to scale or adapt any workout for anyone. And you in particular focus on brain injury and neurological injury. Is that correct?
Yep. Yeah.
How did you get so specific?
So I'm a speech and language pathologist, and I'm a certified brain injury specialist. And I work, over the years, I've largely worked in rehabilitation settings. And I started working with individuals after rehab looking for continued speech, language, and cognitive rehab to kind of get them back to more functional living, not just kind of your basic speech therapy, like folks who, for example, wanted to go back to work and they didn't feel their language capacity was good enough. And they were looking for something that could help integrate them more back into their community and back into functional use of their language. And somewhere along the lines of my career, got into CrossFit. I became a CrossFit coach and pretty quickly thought there's a really great potential for these individuals in the gym. Not just the physical deficits that can come with a stroke or brain injury, which are wide and can be very varied person to person. But for folks who have trouble communicating or following instructions or paying attention or remembering things, there's just the gym is rife with opportunity to help people improve those skills. And so I started taking these clients into the gym.
So what came first? Did you have this degree or CrossFit?
The degree in speech came first. And one of the things in rehab, once I started doing CrossFit and sort of fell into the learning element of everything about the gym and the movements and the motivation to kind of grow and learn, and thinking about how the coach's role in a lot of ways is helping people do things that are really difficult for them. There's a lot of that in cognitive therapy. Like if you have a brain injury and it's hard for you to remember things on a day-to-day, or it's hard for you to even name common objects, as a speech therapist, my job is to really put you through a therapeutic process that's hard for you, but that I know is good for you. And so once I started coaching, I was like, this is another element of helping people do hard things to help better themselves.
And you're at CrossFit Invictus, a pretty well-recognized name out there. How'd you get involved at Invictus?
So I've coached a couple of different places, and I actually started working with stroke patients with Spencer Hendel out at One Nation. I sort of had a chance meeting with him, and he was willing to take on a few clients with me. And then I still work at Mass General Hospital. So in the throes of the pandemic, I stopped coaching in any capacity because being a frontline worker took its own toll. And I sort of got back involved with Invictus when Burn Prince put forth the Invictus Invitational. He had reached out looking for some folks to help volunteer with that, and I got connected with Invictus there. And I said, "Hey, I run this program for stroke survivors in the gym," and they were like, "This is great, come along." And they've really afforded me the opportunity and the space to be able to run this program for folks.
What was your first coaching experience like? So you had your degree, you get involved in CrossFit. What was your first kind of realization of there's some sort of overlap here, and then B, what did that look like as you were first getting started?
I think myself as an athlete, as I started to dig a little bit into gymnastics and wanted to learn complex movements, I really went sort of full nerd into learning everything I needed to know to ever do a bar muscle up. And the sort of break the skill down into its small components and to build it back up again was what really connected for me. As a coach, I wanted to help people do that. And as a speech therapist, you have to do that when you're helping someone. For example, if you have trouble remembering things and it starts really small. It starts with remembering things that happen from minute to minute, people in your everyday life, people you've seen today, all the way up to complex working memory. Like I give you 7 words and you have to kind of reorganize them on the fly or do mental math. So there was this overlap for me in coaching of the skill development of the break it down, build it back up again so that you can have better global understanding.
Yeah. And, I was looking through your social media and you've got such a wide range of athletes coming in. How are people seeking you out? How are people finding out that, this is because you're really a specialty within a specialty, right? I mean, in both areas,
Yeah.
you're like you said, you're a speech pathologist, but you're also a CrossFit trainer, both specialties. And then it's like this Venn diagram of like, hey, I fit right in the middle there.
Yeah. Yeah. When I first started the program, I did a lot of visiting with support groups, like stroke support group, brain injury, aneurysm support group, and reaching out to physicians and providers and who I thought might have individuals who are connected and might need this kind of service. The bigger buy-in actually came from within the CrossFit community, which isn't super surprising to me. And it kind of quickly became word of mouth. And I use my Instagram the most because I feel like people can't conceptualize it unless they can see it. And I think the coolest thing about the range of athletes on my Instagram is that it has just opened the door for people who never thought they could. I get inquiries all the time from people who are like, I don't know if this is the right program for me, but and I think it lets people who didn't think that fitness was for them or that the gym was a place for them see that it can be. I'm not sure if that totally answers the question, but yeah, people, it's a lot of word of mouth, a lot of connecting with gyms. And the truth is, I share this statistic a lot. There are 5.3 million people living with a disability as a result of a brain injury. So everybody knows somebody who had a stroke or a brain injury or some sort of neurological condition that they're having trouble recovering from. So a lot of word of mouth has done the trick.
What's the most common brain injury?
The most common cause of brain injury is a fall.
Is a fall.
Yep. And that, largely impacts our older population and our younger. And then that's followed by car accidents and motor vehicle accidents, high speed kinds of things. And then, after that, there's all range of things, but fall is way up there.
So are you finding that most of the people that you work with are previous CrossFitters that have a brain injury or brain injury that find CrossFit?
It's a little bit of both. My very first client was a CrossFitter. It had CrossFit kind of running in the family, and that was sort of an easy buy-in. And then I actually have a client in Germany who's a CrossFit coach who had a stroke. And the owner of his box reached out and said, can you help him? We're trying to help him get back to fitness, but also back to communicating because he's not able to use his language very well. So it's a mix of both. A lot of people coming through the door have no CrossFit experience and don't know much about it. But when you start talking about what functional fitness is and what that can mean for them, it's really powerful.
So the average person finds CrossFit and it's super intimidating. We can start anywhere really, but it's usually like, hey, it's an air squat. etc.
Yeah.
How is that different when someone, and I assume, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's degrees of brain injury.
Yes,
Like
absolutely.
what's very low end? What might that look like?
With brain injury, you could have a range of physical deficits and no cognitive deficits, or you could have no physical injury and have all kinds of challenges with cognition and language. On a mild end, you might have someone who struggles to pay attention in a busy environment, who has a hard time remembering kind of day-to-day tasks. Sometimes if it's language-based, people just, that feeling of the end of the day and you're tired and you're like, get me the thing over there that I use to see better. That's word finding difficulty, and folks who have aphasia, which is a language deficit caused by an injury to the brain, struggle with that on a range and a continuum.
Okay, this is my specialty. My specialty is asking offensive questions, but not meaning to. So let me, and knowing Kevin Ogar and Alec, they always remind me it's not offensive if you're trying to come from a good place. So
yes,
I'm coming from a good place, just truly trying to get a better understanding.
Please.
Can these brain injuries just be developed? In other words, do I have a brain injury? Because sometimes I can't remember things and I can't pay attention well. Can they be developed just without any trauma?
Not generally organically. I mean, there are all kinds of things.
You're saying there's a chance.
I don't know your history well enough, but there's always a chance for something like a post-concussive syndrome. You get hit in the head enough times, and that can cause memory difficulties. But I use those examples to put it to scale, right? Because we all sort of know that feeling, but that sort of tip of the tongue phenomenon where you just can't say the word. Now magnify that by 10 or 100 or 200, depending on the level of injury. And that is why, in some ways, it translates really well into the gym, because those folks have to practice. They just have to practice using their words. And so in the gym, sometimes we practice just naming what the items are, remembering the names of the members, describing what they did in a workout. And it's just another opportunity to use language to help with new learning.
Well, let me ask you another offensive question.
Please.
When I was growing up, there was no ADD or ADHD, right? I'm 43. So, graduated high school 96, college 2000. I don't know how old you are. You look a little younger than me.
Not much.
Not much. Okay. But, and there's other things happening this day and age amongst teenagers. And I'm like, that wasn't an option when I was 15, 16, etc. What's your opinion on that, as someone who's studied this? And I know you probably have to toe a line that I don't have to toe. But I mean, in other words, when I was a kid, it wasn't, hey, you may have ADHD. It was like, this kid doesn't pay attention in class, put him in the remedial class, right? And those were the kids that got, had a stigma associated.
Yeah.
Was ADHD not a thing? Is it still not a thing? Is it a thing that too many people are getting lumped into? And I'm, again, I'm truly just curious.
Yeah, I grew up in the same age as you did, where it was like nobody had ADD, and then suddenly everybody had EDD. And I think that we've sometimes shuffled through different diagnoses. I think now there are other things that are a little more en vogue. As a speech pathologist, it's dealing with folks who have brain injury, for example. It's hard when everyone's like, oh, I'm so ADD right now, or, oh, I can't remember. I never remember anything, because in some ways that's dismissive, because there are individuals whose brains are truly impacted.
And I don't want to be clear, like, we're talking about acute injury for a lot of these people, right?
Yeah.
So obviously there's some sort of trauma, and I'm assuming under an MRI, is that what you would go under?
MRI or CT scan, yep.
You can see it. I mean, I've watched enough CSI and whatnot to see the red and whatnot in the brain. Things are definitely happening in there.
Yeah.
And, to a fault, I'd say the same thing. It's like when I was a kid, not everyone was being diagnosed with autism or Asperger's. Right. And it was clearly something then. It just, we didn't know enough about it. So I'm just wondering, is it we didn't know about it, or is it just an easy classification to put a kid in, like, oh, he doesn't pay attention? Maybe it's you're feeding him like sugar nonstop, right? There's other aspects to it. Maybe he's just got to be controlled a little better, right? Like if someone, I have a 7-month-old, and in a few years, if they were like, she has ADHD, I'd be like, cool, what can I do naturally?
Right.
Rather than just saying she has ADHD and now you have an excuse to, not pay attention.
Right. And I think it, science is always advancing, right? And what we always talk about the brain, I worked with a physician who used to say the brain is the final frontier of medicine. So there's still a lot that we don't know about the brain, what's going on in terms of diagnoses, how we can treat these different things. So sometimes I think it's more that we start to learn more about the brain and we see, oh, we can treat that. But yeah, I think there's a lot to be learned about cognition in general is such a tricky beast, as is language, that we don't always know what's happening with the brain. And I think there's a lot of, kind of pivoting a little bit, there's a lot of research now about what fitness can do for the brain, which is sort of how I ended up tying these things together. We know there's a lot of research, for example, about conditions where there are now psychiatrists who prescribe exercise because it actually makes changes in the brain when you work out. And what we're starting to see more evidence of now is that exercise actually changes the brain at the cellular level, and it primes the brain for new learning. So there are specific studies that show that there's an increase in the area of the brain called the hippocampus, which is responsible for new learning. So when you exercise, your brain is actually primed to learn, to lay down new memories, to learn new things, which is why it's a great environment for individuals with neurological conditions.
Yeah, I mean, there must be some sort of connection, because we all do this exercise thing and then we wind up feeling better, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah, and so we know that there are impacts psychologically, and now we also know that fitness influences neuroplasticity, which is how the brain heals itself, which is how it grows, which is how, if it's been damaged, it finds new pathways to do things again.
Have you had anyone that you've worked with that didn't have traumatic brain injury, but had been classified as ADD or ADHD, and then you've worked with them and seen improvements?
Most of my clients have come with some diagnoses. I think some folks, when they're really complex medical, like I have some, with complex oncological histories who have suffered from the effects of chemo and things like that, who don't come with a diagnosis of an ADD or something like that. But as a specialist, I can kind of see the cognitive challenges that are there, and I'm able to see how they're able to make changes and apply that in the gym. But I haven't had a lot of folks specifically that would answer that situation now.
We in the What is Fitness lecture, you have your level 2. So if you remember back to your level 1, What is Fitness, we talk about the 10 general skills, and there's cardiorespiratory, flexibility, strength, and stamina. And we say, hey, these are organic and training. And then there's 2 in the middle, power, speed. And then the bottom 4, balance, accuracy, agility, and coordination, we say are neurological. They come from practice, and equally, they all help power and speed. So when we say that, neurologically, those things are developed, are those 4, balance, accuracy, agility, and coordination, really what's helping a lot of the people that you're working with?
I think it's part of it, right? And part of the reason I think a part of the reason we refer to those as neurological too is that you have to learn them and train them, right? You have to prime your brain to be able to do these kinds of movement patterns. And so it works both ways. So some of the clients that come to me they really struggle with balance and agility and things like that because of the level of their injury, because maybe only one half of their body is working functionally, because maybe they can't feel one side of their body. And so there is a level of, chicken or the egg, where we need to practice these skills to develop the learning. But also the brain drives the development of some of these skills. So it's hard to answer, but I think that we know that all of these things can benefit everyone. And, even on a small scale, we think about, people who suffer from brain injury are very likely to suffer a second one.
Even if it's acute, even if it's because of an injury?
Regardless of, people, they're more susceptible, they're more vulnerable, largely
like a concussion.
Because they struggle from things like difficulty with balance, difficulty with coordination, and then cognitively, perhaps reduced safety awareness and poor insight, right? So there are all these factors in which people get themselves potentially into unsafe situations, and now their brain is vulnerable, and now they have another brain injury. So at a very simple level, if you've suffered a brain injury and we can get you a little more steady on your feet, and get your coordination and your balance and your agility just a little bit sharper, we might be able to stave off another injury. We might be able to, we can sort of help you. I always talk about in my practice, rehab kind of helps you get to a place where you're good enough. And I think bringing these folks in and training them in fitness provides an opportunity to be better than good enough. There's more than just, okay, now you can walk in a straight line. It's okay, well, how can we help you move better and be safer out there in the world?
We can probably take a lot of these practices and principles you're talking about, but, for the average person listening who doesn't have this, degree that you have and doesn't necessarily have a member with brain, injury, when we talk about the neurological stuff, I always think about, like, for an example, you ever see an agility ladder?
Yeah.
Right? You throw it on the ground and people are like, why do I have to do this? And my answer has always been, well, if you can do this 2 in, 2 out, or whatever drill you're running, it's a little less likelihood that you're going to fall down, right?
Yeah.
If grandma can do this, albeit slow and uncoordinated looking,
Right.
if she did fall, she's more likely to stand back up, or you're preventing the opportunity for her to fall. So we can still be looking at things from that perspective. And same holds true with double unders. Like, oh, am I ever going to need a double under in real life? Probably not. But if you can do double unders, you're showing me you have a little more coordination than the average person.
Right. And, I always talk too with clients about how I think after you've had a brain injury or a stroke and you have to learn how to walk and be safe again, rehab teaches you how to be safe, right? Like, we want to make sure you're steady on your feet, hold on to the handrail, use the armrests when you sit and you stand. And when clients come to me, one of the first things I say is, show me how you get down to the ground. And they look at me like I'm nuts, because they don't ever get to the ground, because why would they? That's not safe. And I always fall into, like, well, what if, and not if, but when you fall, how would you get up? And there's always this look of, well, I've spent all this time in recovery being safe. Well, that's great, but we want to train you to get out of unsafe situations. And in my first session with every client, I make them get down to the floor and back up again with whatever modifications they need. But to get that understanding of, like, hey, yeah, this can happen in everyday life. And that's part of that better than good enough. We don't want to just, like, keep you safe and put you in a little box, a little glass jar, and kind of, okay, you're safe there. We want to give you the skills to get out of an unsafe situation potentially.
Would you recommend, because, the balance that I want to figure out here is, okay, if you work directly with people in person, you mentioned you're putting together a course also, which I assume people will be able to access online. And just like the adaptive training, check it out. Even if it's just for your own knowledge, you're going to have one person that walks in there as a box owner. That's what separates you from the box down the road. Hey, I've got this, course that I can help with. But assuming you don't have anyone with a brain injury, is that a drill you would recommend somebody walks in, you have them do that? Is it like they're a certain age? Is it, do you test everybody? Hey, can you get down to the ground and get back up?
I mean, the way that I do it, right, just like anything else, I make it as functional as possible, right? So I say to them, if you had to pick something up off the floor, what would you do? And most of them say, well, I would put my hand on the couch, and I might lean over, I might hold on something. So I bring a box and I put down some sort of soft gymnastic mats. We put one hand on the box, we put one knee on the floor, and we sort of very slowly learn a pattern to kind of, it's kind of a modified lunge sort of thing. Get to the floor now, knee, then hand, then sit. Okay, that's safer than I just sort of toppled over. So, again, it's like that creative approach to modifying anything. It's not unlike we would do with the elderly population. And it's not unlike when you're teaching someone how to do a burpee for the first time and they've, like, never gone to the floor like that. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a valuable skill. I think we have to modify it. And anyway, for some of those clients, all that is putting one hand on a box and one knee to the ground and practicing kind of a half step lunge, but it's a step in the right direction.
Is it true alligators are ornery because of their medulla oblongata?
It's entirely possible. I can't say for certain because I've not seen it under MRI myself.
But have you seen the water boy?
Yes.
So tell me about this woman, Sydney.
Okay. Yeah.
She's all over your Instagram. She's like, I thought you were Sydney, to be completely honest. She's on your Instagram that much. But tell me about her, because she looks to be like pretty much a badass.
She is a badass, and she will be so grateful that you said that. But one of the cool things about the work that I do is that it has grown from just sort of the acute neuro injury to anything that falls under the umbrella of neuro. And Sydney has cerebral palsy, and
So
she
that's correct me if I'm wrong, but that's genetic. You're born with that.
yes, you are born with
Okay.
it. Yep. So she has CP, and she has been CrossFitting for quite some time, and she has goals of being sort of an elite adaptive athlete. She's qualified for and competing at the Wheel WOD Games this year, and hoping
Awesome.
hoping one day to make it to the CrossFit Games as they sort of hopefully further develop their neuro division.
She would be in Shannon Ogar's division.
Yes. And so in the adaptive world, though, there are generally two classifications for neuro. There's major and there's minor. And at the games, we only had one. So as far as leveling the playing field, I think there's still some work to be done as the games figures it out. Only 4 classifications got invited to the games, but there were multiple. Yeah.
I'm hoping for short stature to make the games, because I'm short stature high, which means I'm 5'3". So I'm borderline ready to compete at the games.
You're ready for it.
If they have a short stature high, I will smash Mikey, the world's fittest dwarf.
Yeah, there you go.
Big time. Mikey's been on the show. Sean, other people, like I will crush those guys.
Yeah, you're on it. I'll be rooting for you.
So,
but let me just say, as far as Sydney is concerned, I think
keep it serious.
Yeah, just not. I'm okay with not serious, but I want to just add that I think what's been cool in this process is being able to help people who have already gotten into the CrossFit and they're doing their thing, but with the understanding of neuro, with knowing what her brain needs to sort of optimize movement patterns, to optimize fitness. So for her, it has a lot to do. She has spasticity. So she has a lot of spasticity in her hips, which makes some of classic RX movements, they don't look the way that everyone else thinks that they should look. And she herself has internalized that, right? Like she's big on like, oh, like when I push press, the barbell goes around my face. It's not supposed to go around. Well, it's like, well, yes, but because of the position of her hips, she's postured forward, right? So if the barbell doesn't go around her face, she's going to hit herself in the face. And so a lot of it is understanding fitness applied to neuro. And it's not adapting is not scaling. It's making it work with her limitations. And, just what I know about the brain has kind of helped to optimize her fitness.
Yeah. That's something we've learned along the way. Adapting is not the same as scaling, and you have to refer to it properly, because it's demeaning to always use the word scaling, because, these are people that are in the adaptive division, and there's a big difference between, scaling is almost, not that that's a bad thing either, but it's almost like this negative connotation, where adapting is we're making it work for you. You mentioned neuro had kind of 2 categories. What distinguishes those 2 categories?
It really has to do with kind of the level of the limitation, right? So it's not even clearly delineated within diagnosis, because neuro is a really, really diverse field. So there can be 2 athletes that have CP, and one is major and one is minor. So I know that Wheel WOD in general, like when they classify athletes, there's an interview process. They see them move, and I don't know all of the classification, all of the criteria that is. But it's interesting when you look at neuro, right? Like the range of even just the girls that were there, their diagnoses were really different, and the things that they can and can't do were really different, and that has to do with their brain.
And that's a challenge I think CrossFit's going to have to navigate. And luckily, there's people like Stouty and Logan and Kevin and Alec, really playing a big role. Because you're right. I mean, I know Shannon Ogar pretty well. I've trained with her. She's in Denver, and I mean, if you were to just see Shannon, you wouldn't think that she was adaptive. I mean, you get to know her and she talks to you and she explains a little bit. But yeah, I think especially short stature is pretty cut and dry. Are you above this line or below this line?
Right.
Or single arm amputee versus, you got 2 or you got 1, right? Logan's not like faking, not that anyone's faking, but Logan clearly has 1 arm, right?
Right.
So we're not debating that.
Right. And in neuro, and I think a lot of people just don't understand neuro as well, because it's so complicated, but it's like the level of fitness doesn't always align with the level of limitation, right? Like you've seen Sydney on my Instagram, she's super fit.
She's got 6-pack. Yeah, she's fitter than me.
Yes, she's very fit, but her degree of limitation is more severe than some of the others who competed at the games. But if you were to strip that away and talk about baseline fitness, put her at the CrossFit Games, right? And it's a really hard category. And interestingly, like, I don't know how much you watched of the adaptive divisions, but as someone who's neuro, so much of the coverage was focus on upper and lower. I had an athlete who was competing there, and I kept being like, put the camera on neuro, because it doesn't tell the story the same way. You look at upper, you like amputee, and that tells a story. And I think that that's really important. And I think it's really been motivating for the adaptive world at large. But I still think that neuro is kind of, like I said, brain injury is, quote, the invisible injury. And I don't think it's well understood and not as well represented as it could be. And that's partly one of the things I'm trying to do in my practice, is just say, like, hey, neuro peeps, this is a place for you.
Yeah. I mean, you see Logan clean and jerk 225 with one arm, and you're like, that's impressive, right?
Yes,
and you see someone like Shannon or even Sydney. I mean, looking at pictures on your Instagram, there's nothing, and that's probably the challenge with neuro, right? Like, you look at Sydney, you're like, okay, this girl's taking my class, period. Right? I don't think anything. I think there are probably giveaways, like you said, like you see the way people with CP tend to walk, right? I'm friends with Steph Hammerman, and you can see it. She looks like she has a very similar gait or stance, if you will, posture as Sydney. So there's clearly some overlap there. But outside of that, you're just like, all right, go.
Yeah. And even CP has their like at least 4 different types. So it's not all one diagnosis, and you think about adaptive, you think about modifying, and it's like for seated athletes, for example, there's a classification for seated with hip function and seated without hip function, right? And the movement patterns change the way you modify things. I have a client who's seated, who has a neurological condition, who also has something called ataxia. So he doesn't have good motor control. So if he, for example, reaches for something, as he reaches, he overshoots because his brain the message doesn't coordinate to move the way that he should. So when he's in the gym with me, like, I hold onto the barbell so that he doesn't hit himself, right? Because he can lift the weight, but his body may just say, oh, I'm going to move this sideways, or I'm going to jump as I'm lifting. And so for him, he doesn't fit into seated. And he doesn't fit into neuro because he's seated, because he has hip function, but because of his ataxia, he can't move the way that a seated athlete with hip function moves, if that makes sense. So it's very complicated.
This is a serious question. Can dogs have brain injury? Because I think one of my dogs has a brain injury.
Yes, they can. And to that point, one of my dogs has a seizure disorder. And when we went her through the workup to try to figure out what, they did an MRI, and I was like, this is so cool. Show me her brain. And in dogs, in the MRI, the cerebellum, which is sometimes known as the mini brain, it sits at the back above the brainstem, it's what's responsible for movement and coordination. And in dogs, it's much bigger relative to the rest of the brain than for humans, because movement is their thing.
Yeah, my dog only has a mini brain. Rocky. He's missing the rest of it, I think. You're frozen. Let's see. You there still, Jenna?
Oh, there it is. I heard you start to say something about your dog, and then it froze.
Well, I was just saying he only has a mini brain.
Mini brain? Is he a mini dog, or?
He is. He's a French bulldog. He sleeps all day. But
I have a puggle. She does that too.
And he falls down. I mean, he tries to do things he shouldn't. Like, he'll fall downstairs. I think he doesn't have a brain injury, but he's just a little, slow. But it is amazing. You mentioned that. It makes me think something I've always said is, like, we have a 7-month-old who still is on the verge of crawling. Dogs come out and they're walking.
Yep.
That's crazy to me still. I mean, I know that's off topic, but.
Yeah, no, it's like I said, the brain is so fascinating. And it can do so many things, and it also has so many opportunities to improve all the time, which is why I love what I do, because I can help people with thinking and talking and moving and finding better ways to move through space. And we know how good fitness is for everybody. So it's like, if we can help your brain get better by getting you move, then that's awesome.
Well, one other thing I wanted to talk about is on your social media. If people haven't checked it out, Fit to Function Recovery.
Yep.
That's your Instagram. Yeah. But you have a picture of, it looks to me like tuna, maybe some mango, some beans, cucumber, white rice. Looks like a really good dinner. But nutrition clearly plays a role.
Yeah.
Talk to me about that, as well as, are you using, I mean, there's a lot of, what's the term? I don't know what the term I'm looking for is, but there's a lot of drugs that are being used, in other words, for brain, right? I don't know
Yes.
what's the term I'm looking for?
I mean, just
Progressive. Progressive, maybe?
for just medication for brain
Yeah,
injury.
people are using like
Yeah,
THC and other
yeah, all
things.
kinds
So
of things.
so tell me about both of those. Talk to me about the
Drugs
role
and
of
nutrition.
nutrition. Yeah, I mean separate. Keep them
Yeah.
separate.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting working, in a hospital, and I talk about this on that particular post, is that when you have a brain injury, your metabolic need increases significantly. And the way I always describe it to clients, right, is that your brain is responsible for everything, and it regulates movement and emotion and feeling and thinking and all of that. And when you've had a brain injury, it's still doing all of those things while it's actually working to physically repair itself.
Mhm.
And so you need a lot more nutrition, a lot more in. And what we find, which is probably not surprising at all, is that just like I was talking about, you have that time at the end of the day when you're trying to find the word you want to say and you just can't because you're tired, right? That happens if you're hungry too. So if you haven't had enough to eat, if you're not fueled and you haven't had enough sleep, that's going to impact a vulnerable cognitive system. So if you struggle with word finding or you struggle with remembering, it shouldn't be surprising that if your brain and body are not well fueled, those things are going to be that much harder, right? We see it in the hospital all the time. Like somebody doesn't have a good night's sleep, for example, and their cognition looks like it's more impaired. Or maybe they're barely eating and they're not functioning as well from a thinking perspective because their body's just not fueled. So, I don't do nutrition myself. I work with tactic functional method for nutrition. So I have a coach and I try to get my clients to also have a coach to help them eat more, to help support the recovery of their brain, but also their ability to function in the gym and their ability to talk and think better, because I think that's super important.
I can't think or talk until I have coffee. Is that, I mean, that's a true story, right? Like, so I wake up and I try to delay my coffee for about 90 minutes to 2 hours. I saw that on Andrew Huberman. I don't know if you've heard of him,
Uh-huh.
but that's
Yeah.
something and it's gotten better, but it's noticeable the difference in how fast my brain is functioning post caffeine. Is that normal?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, caffeine affects the brain. We know that, right? It's kind of like lights up some neurotransmitters, gets things firing. It doesn't mean that it's always as good for us as we want it to be, but it feels good in the moment. It's just like taking medication for attention, which we is also something a lot of individuals suffering from brain injury do.
Well, that's a thing that wasn't happening back in the 90s either, right? No one was taking like
Right.
Adderall or whatever is going on
Yeah.
these days.
Yeah. In terms of like, we keep talking about attention, right? And I always say to individuals, and it's true that attention is the building block of cognition, right? If you can't pay attention, you can't remember something that someone has said. If you can't pay attention to something that someone is saying to you, you can't understand it. If you can't pay attention to yourself, as you're trying to generate a message, the message goes off track, right? Like you kind of lose the sense of what it was you were trying to do and say. And so for a lot of individuals after a brain injury, they are on a stimulant. We do put them on medication to help them attend, because they need to be able to attend to their environment to start the learning process again. So that's pretty common.
No, that makes total sense. I know we've had some fun with some of these questions, but I do have a fun question, but all of them are serious. Don't, it's 2021.
It
Do you
is.
think technology has impaired people's ability to pay attention? Because I'm telling you, 2005, I had a different brain.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, and I am someone that works hard. I don't keep social media on my phone. I
Good
try
for
not to
you.
be on top of it. I do it every day, but I try to do it on my computer, so it's very
Yeah.
purposeful. I mean, even when I'm like trying to meditate, at times my brain's going crazy.
Yeah.
So, do you think like just the world around us is making it harder for everyone these days to be attentive?
I do. I mean, so they're at the highest level of attention is something we call divided attention, right? And that's when we're paying attention to a bunch of things at once. Like we're sort of back and forth between a conversation, and maybe we're cooking, and maybe we're listening to a podcast, and maybe the dog wants a treat, and you're sort of able to bounce back and forth. And there's a lot of disagreement out there in the world of cognition about whether divided attention actually exists. Can you truly attend?
I think it's no. I've read stuff
Right.
like that, and I believe it's no. I think
Right.
it's like doing more than one workout a day. If you do more than one workout a day, more than one workout is getting half-assed.
Right.
And I would say the same about multitasking. None of
Right.
them are getting done well.
Right. And so to sort of answer your question, right, like as far as the world, the state of the world and the state of social media and the fact that it's like everything is pinging and flashing and we're looking at all of these things, yes, we can shift our focus from one thing to the next, but how well are we attending to any of those things? And I do think that there's an increase in stimuli in our environment in general. And I think that makes it hard to focus. I mean, I know a lot of individuals who felt like at the height of the pandemic, they could focus better, right? Because there just wasn't as much stimulation. You were just in one place, just listening to the news, perhaps, of what was happening in the world, but you weren't interacting while looking at your phone, while thinking about the next thing, while checking your calendar. You know, it's an interesting environment that we live in now, that's for sure.
Do you have kids, Jenna?
I do not. I have 2 dogs, though.
Oh, same. We have 3 dogs. 3 too many is what I like to say. And you have a puggle, you said. I used to have 2 pugs, so.
Yes. Oh, yeah. I have a puggle, and then I have a 60-pound hound dog mix. We think she's a plot hound.
Nice. Well, and the reason I was going to say that is because what I learned, one thing that really was eye-opening to me when having, what Madison, our daughter, is people like to ask, what's one of the best parts? And I'm like, you have to pay attention. Right. Yeah. And it's like, my wife's actually texting me because she's about to leave and I got to go grab her. But it's like, okay, when I'm with her, that's it. And I notice a difference too. Like when I'm feeding her and I try to watch something on my iPad or not pay full attention, she's scattered.
Yeah.
So I think you're seeing that, like even at 7 months old, like she's picking up on the fact, hey, you're not giving me your undivided attention. It's a different baby. When I'm feeding her, just sitting there in the morning, nothing on, it's calming for me.
Yeah, right.
And you have a better, deeper, stronger connection with your child. And B, I think she's appreciative of it, as crazy as it sounds.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I mean, babies learn from us, from watching your face, your facial expressions, your eyes. As like speech pathology, we also do childhood development. And I have wondered so much how much masking so much of our face will impact kind of youth development because before we had all the stimuli, like when you were with your baby, you were just with your baby and the baby is watching you and connecting with you and learning from you. So yeah, do that. Focus in on that. That's a good thing to attend to.
It's great. It's really forced. I do my best to be really focused on one thing. It's not always possible, but I do my best. So we gave you your Instagram, Fit to Function Recovery. You can also check out your website, which is fittofunctionrecovery.com. But when do you anticipate your course being available?
I'm still working on it. I'm hoping for the winter time. But it's a lot. Turns out it's a lot to develop a course and a certification. And I'm getting inquiries from people all over the world, which is awesome. And people looking for gyms in their area. And so I'm hoping at a minimum to start being able to just kind of consult with other gyms or offer kind of some sort of online course or connection. There's a lot of different avenues it could take, but hoping for the months ahead.
And if someone has a member, can they hit the contact button on your website? Is that a good place to start?
Absolutely. Most definitely. Yeah. I'm happy to help and to help consult. And I think, that I always say that, any trainer with the right mindset can help anyone. Right. And so, yes, I have a specialty, but at a minimum, if we can just get more of these individuals into the gym, we know that we can improve lives.
And that's truly the beauty of CrossFit. I remember this is like 2007 or 8. Coach Glassman was traveling, giving seminars. He called them like 101s. And I remember him saying something to the extent of, I wouldn't cross the street to watch a 2-minute Fran, but I'd cross the street to help someone with their air squat. And that's really what it's all about. I mean, I think, we're forging elite fitness still. This is still CrossFit. Let's not forget about those people that are really pushing the boundaries of what fitness is and pushing their bodies to that next level. But realistically, 99% of the people you're going to interact with don't care about the CrossFit Games. They have no desire to go. And whether it's a brain injury or whether it's they need to lose 20 pounds or whether they just want to be the best version of themselves, that's who you're trying to help. That's why we do this thing. I mean, if anything, the people trying to make the games are your pain in the ass members. Get rid of them. Get rid of them and get more people that are just trying to improve their lives.
Right. And I tell people too, I feel like sometimes these stroke survivors, brain injury survivors, they're just a group of forgotten individuals, right? Like one of my stroke survivors, he's 56 years old and he was a power lifter years and years ago, but still, this is a guy who thought the gym was out of the question. And he deadlifted 75 pounds the other day. And he was like, please take a picture and send it to my daughter. You know, like these are people who had lives before their injury. They are not just their injury. And so why can't they come back to the gym? You know, why can't we get them involved and let them be proud of themselves again?
Not only why can't they need to come back to the gym.
Yes, absolutely.
They need to come back to the gym. And you're doing some awesome things. I'm really excited, you know, for people to check you out. Like I said, Fit to Function Recovery, because if you don't already, you're going to have people that want to come to your box and they'll have a brain injury. And you know, to be able to say whether you've taken Jenna's course once it's available or just you're knowledgeable in the subject, you're just putting yourself not only at an advantage when it comes to the other affiliates in town. And my goal is every affiliate in the world can handle this. I don't want this to be an advantage. I want everyone to be able to do it. But, you know, in the meantime, you are putting yourself in the position of authority and the ability to help other people. So it's really great. So
thank you.
Anything that I didn't catch, Jenna? We talked about the water boy. We talked about.
Actually, if I can say one more serious thing, it just occurred to me too, is that you think about a lot of folks, brain injuries is really isolating, right? Like you lose your work cohort, you lose your friends maybe because you just don't have the same kind of ability to interact. And one of the most powerful things about this is that it's community, right? Like we know the power of the community in any CrossFit setting. And I think getting folks back to a place where they can find community again is so important.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's really, you know, so true. I'm sure for those people that have suffered a brain injury, maybe there's like some embarrassment, right? That they're not the person that they once were, but they are, you know, who they are now. And you're going to help them, you know, be proud of that. And like anybody, I've always said this about CrossFitters is you're not a CrossFitter until you show up injured.
Right.
Because it's so easy to be like, oh, I only train when I feel great. And it's like, it's going to go away when you hit your 40s. I promise you that. So it's like to show up and know I can't go RX or to know the workout needs to be adapted. Like that's the sign of like, I'm in this thing.
Yeah. And I've actually had athletes say like, I shouldn't be complaining. Your stroke survivors are in the gym doing more than I did today. I have no right to complain. And I'm like, yeah, it's a good way to think about it. Like everybody's doing hard things, you know? So we can all keep on keeping on in that sense.
I love it. We can all keep on keeping on. Thank you so much, Jenna, for coming on here.
Thank you so much.
Like I said numerous times, reach out to her. You're a wealth of knowledge, and you know currently you're at the forefront of this in the CrossFit world. So that's pretty awesome.
Thank you so much. This was great.
So you never miss an episode of the podcast, subscribe to our YouTube channel and on all major podcasting platforms at Best Hour of Their Day. Thank you so much for tuning in and for being a part of the best hour of our day. See you next time.